On Wednesday, April 22, 2026, the Pentagon delivered a statement that, while brief in wording, carried the weight of a much larger story. Standing before reporters, Pentagon spokesman Sean Parnell confirmed that Secretary of the Navy John Phelan was stepping down, effective immediately. There was no transition period, no gradual handover, just a clean break. Parnell offered a customary note of gratitude for Phelan's service, but the tone did little to mask the abruptness of the decision. For a man who had been sworn in just over a year earlier, an outsider billionaire businessman and a major ally of Donald Trump, the speed of his departure raised more questions than answers. Within hours, a replacement was named. Taking over as acting Secretary of the Navy is Hung Cao, a 25-year Navy veteran and current undersecretary. Cao is not simply a bureaucratic placeholder. He represents a clear ideological shift, one that aligns closely with the administration's evolving vision of military strength and identity. During his unsuccessful 2024 Senate campaign in Virginia, Cao drew national attention for his blunt and controversial rhetoric. Speaking about military readiness, he declared, "What we need is alpha males and alpha females who are going to rip out their own guts, eat them, and ask for seconds." The remark, at once visceral and provocative, captured the ethos now increasingly associated with the Pentagon's leadership, a return to an uncompromising, aggressive warrior culture. Phelan's exit is not an isolated personnel change. It is part of a broader and more deliberate restructuring campaign led by Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth. In recent weeks, Hegseth has overseen what many insiders are calling a systematic purge of senior military leadership. High-ranking officials have been removed, reassigned, or pressured into early retirement, often with little public explanation. Among the most notable departures, Randy George, who was asked to retire immediately, David Hodney, a key figure in transformation and training, William Green. Even members of the Joint Chiefs of Staff have not been spared, with reports confirming the dismissal of senior naval and Air Force leadership. The message is unmistakable. Alignment is no longer optional. Hegseth's vision emphasizes a military defined less by bureaucratic continuity and more by ideological cohesion, a force shaped in the image of what the administration calls a warrior ethos. Supporters argue this is a necessary correction. Critics warn it risks politicizing the armed forces at a dangerous moment. Because beyond Washington, the world is tightening. Thousands of miles away, in the narrow waters of the Strait of Hormuz, a geopolitical standoff is rapidly evolving into an economic and military crisis. On April 13, the United States imposed a full naval blockade on Iranian ports, an aggressive move aimed at crippling Tehran's economic lifelines. The White House, through Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt, signaled confidence, stating that the president was satisfied with the pressure campaign and viewed Iran as being in one of its weakest positions in decades. Iran responded 5 days later with a move that sent shockwaves through global markets, the formal closure of the strait. For decades, the Strait of Hormuz has functioned as one of the world's most critical energy corridors, carrying nearly 20% of global oil supply. Its closure is not just a regional disruption, it is a global chokehold. Iranian negotiator Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf declared that reopening the waterway would be impossible as long as US and Israeli actions continued. In the past 24 hours, tensions have escalated further. Iranian forces have reportedly seized 2 commercial vessels, tightening their grip on the already paralyzed shipping route. The implications are immediate and far-reaching. Energy prices are surging, global supply chains are straining, the risk of direct military confrontation is growing by the hour. While naval forces posture at sea, the human toll of conflict continues to mount on land. In southern Lebanon, a drone strike has ignited outrage and renewed accusations of war crimes. The attack, which occurred in the village of Tayri, killed veteran journalist Amal Khalil and left photographer Zainab Faraj seriously wounded. Lebanon's Prime Minister Nawaf Salam did not mince words, describing the incident as a war crime and accusing Israeli forces of deliberately targeting members of the press. Accounts from the ground paint a deeply troubling sequence. An initial strike hit a vehicle ahead of the journalists, killing 2 men. In the chaos that followed, Khalil and Faraj fled into a nearby house, seeking shelter. Moments later, that house was struck. What came next has drawn particular condemnation. Officials claim that attempts to reach the victims were obstructed. Sound grenades and live fire reportedly used to prevent a clearly marked Lebanese Red Cross ambulance from accessing the site. Khalil, according to reports, survived the initial blast. She died later, trapped beneath the rubble, before help could reach her. Taken together, these developments reveal more than a series of isolated katanai. They point to a world entering a period of synchronized instability. In Washington, a reshaped military leadership is being forged with urgency and ideological clarity. In the Persian Gulf, a strategic artery of the global economy is effectively severed. In Lebanon, the line between combatant and civilian continues to blur, with deadly consequences. Each thread is dangerous on its own. Combined, they form a pattern that is increasingly difficult to ignore. The question now is no longer whether tensions will rise, but how far they will go, and whether the systems meant to contain them still hold. The current global landscape is defined by a complex struggle between evolving military leadership strategies and the high-stakes reality of international conflict. Within the United States, the decision to replace senior officials with individuals who are strictly aligned with the administration's priorities is intended to create a more unified and responsive command structure. The core reasoning behind this shift is that policy implementation becomes significantly faster when there are fewer internal disagreements to navigate. In a short-term scenario, such as a fast-moving naval confrontation, this could allow for orders to be executed without traditional bureaucratic delays, potentially increasing operational efficiency and sending a much stronger message of deterrence to adversaries. Over time, this cohesion might produce a military that responds more predictably and decisively during global crises. Furthermore, new leadership figures emphasize a renewed focus on combat effectiveness and battlefield resilience. By shifting the military culture toward discipline and endurance, the armed forces may become better prepared for high-intensity, large-scale conflicts against near-peer competitors. This increased readiness could boost the confidence of international allies who rely on American strength for their own security. However, these changes also introduce serious negative risks that could have lasting impacts on institutional stability. The rapid turnover of leadership may blur the essential line between professional military expertise and political loyalty, potentially weakening the nonpartisan nature of the armed forces. In the short term, this can lead to internal uncertainty and a reduced willingness among officers to express dissenting views, which increases the risk of following flawed strategies. Additionally, removing experienced leaders results in a significant loss of institutional memory and diplomatic knowledge. Rebuilding this level of expertise takes many years, and the lack of experienced guidance during a multi-layered crisis could lead to costly planning missteps. While a unified command may be faster, the loss of independent professional judgment could eventually weaken the military's credibility and affect long-term international partnerships. These internal changes are happening against the backdrop of intense regional confrontations, particularly between the United States, Israel, and Iran near the Strait of Hormuz. On one hand, applying heavy military and economic pressure might provide the leverage needed to push Iran back toward diplomatic engagement, as national strain often forces leadership to reconsider their positions. A visible and strong military posture can act as a powerful deterrent, potentially decreasing proxy conflicts and maintaining a fragile balance of power. On the other hand, the risks of this approach are immense. Any disruption to the Strait of Hormuz would cause an immediate global economic shock, leading to soaring energy prices and high inflation that would strain import-dependent economies. There is also the constant danger of military escalation, where a small naval incident or miscalculation could spiral into a full-scale regional war. While this instability might eventually accelerate a global shift toward renewable energy and new trade routes, the immediate human and economic costs would be devastating. The situation is further complicated by recent incidents in Lebanon that have resulted in significant civilian impacts. High-profile tragedies involving civilians often trigger international scrutiny and calls for accountability, which can sometimes force leaders to adopt clearer rules of engagement or push them toward mediation. If the political and economic costs of sustained conflict become too high, these incidents might actually create the momentum needed for localized ceasefires or incremental steps toward peace. However, civilian casualties also intensify public anger and can drive increased support for armed groups, leading to a dangerous cycle of retaliation. When competing narratives about these events dominate the media, it becomes difficult to reach a diplomatic consensus, often resulting in political gridlock. Ultimately, the most likely path forward is a hybrid of these possibilities, characterized by continued tension and periodic escalations without sliding into a total war. The future will depend on whether leaders can use their influence to create stability, or if the risks of economic disruption and institutional instability will lead to a multi-layered global crisis. The current geopolitical situation represents a high-stakes trade-off between operational efficiency and institutional stability. As the military moves toward a more unified command structure, the international community watches closely to see if this cohesion leads to a more effective deterrent or a more volatile global environment. Key strategic takeaways: unity versus independence. The shift toward a leadership team aligned with executive priorities is designed to eliminate bureaucratic friction. While this can lead to faster responses during naval or regional crises, it risks creating an echo chamber where dissenting professional expertise is silenced, potentially leading to strategic blind spots. The deterrence paradox. In the Strait of Hormuz, the maximum pressure strategy serves as a double-edged sword. While it provides the leverage necessary to force diplomatic engagement from Iran, the narrow margin for error means that a single tactical misstep could trigger a global energy crisis and a multi-state conflict. Accountability in crisis. Incidents involving civilian impact, such as those in Lebanon, continue to act as catalysts for international intervention. These events either serve as a bridge to mediated ceasefires or as fuel for prolonged cycles of retaliation, depending on how effectively international organizations can manage the narrative and demand accountability. The most likely path forward is a hybrid scenario of controlled instability. We should expect a continuation of high-pressure economic tactics and periodic localized military escalations, but with a shared global interest in avoiding a total war that would collapse energy markets. Ultimately, the success of this new military and diplomatic posture will depend on precision. The ability to project strength without accidentally triggering an unmanageable escalation remains the most critical challenge for leadership in 2026.